Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited. We have Mark Howerton on the show today. He's a guy and he's a therapist. He's a marriage and family therapist based in Orange County. Thank you so much for making the drive and being
Yeah. Oh
here.
my gosh, I loved it. It was perfect. I'm glad I'm here. Feel really happy to be with you and to share some ideas and yeah, stoked to be here.
Absolutely, because my listeners are primarily female,
Okay.
high performing females at that, and a lot
hmm
of them they're looking for love and they like to hear from a male perspective sometimes, like what's going on, and we have our ideas of what's going on, but sometimes it's nice to hear it
Yeah.
from a man. And you're a therapist, so I assume you're empathetic and
Sure,
you kind
sure,
of
sure.
understand, and you have emotional intelligence. So I would love to ask you some questions.
I love it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said you're open to talking about your personal life as well, which is,
I really, if I can
I,
say, yeah, there's a
it,
few things that I love to approach, just like the value for me from this type of therapy I practice is this line of of sort of the wisdom of therapy and the wisdom of psychology through personal application. So yeah, if there's appropriate times to disclose aspects of my life and how I'm working with a client and how that might be beneficial, I'm open. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, first I want to ask, who do your clients tend to be? Is it across the
That's
board,
a great
age
question.
and
Yeah,
sex?
yeah. So my clients are primarily similar to you, kind of high performing, high achieving, higher education, higher socioeconomic individuals who come to me for either relationship dynamics, stage of life challenges. Uh, my client base is, like I said, typically kind of more professionally minded. As in my private practice, I don't accept insurance, so it's individuals who are paying out of pocket for therapy, which kind of categorically creates a different set of folks that they're able to pay and afford therapy. And
Okay.
so typically that's professionals and high achieving. Men and women, I'd probably say maybe 50-50 couples and individuals.
Okay. Oh, it's 50-50.
hmm Yeah.
Do you think the sex of a therapist, just say someone's looking for a therapist, do you think that has an impact possibly on how effective it could be for someone? Or maybe some people might find it triggering, or
Yeah.
like, does that make a difference for some people? Because personally, I've never had a male therapist before.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it.
You know
I
what
love this
my
conversation.
therapist looks like? She's older. She's 80 and she's Asian. And
Okay.
for me, it feels very like motherly,
Yeah.
and the things she gives me that maybe I didn't get when I was younger. Like the first time I saw her, we see her at her house and she was waiting for me on her patio. And she said, Christine, like, I've been waiting for you. It's so nice to meet you. And I got teary. But
Oh
but
my
the fact
gosh.
that she's Asian and she's older, I think
Yeah.
kind of like adds a little bit to it. So yes, I would like
Absolutely.
to ask, what do you think about,
Yeah.
male, female therapist
I think that's a
age?
great question. And even, your illustration is perfect because the opposite may be true. You might actually benefit from seeing a non-Asian male therapist just to kind of realize that there's so much transference that you might have towards this particular woman you worked with compared to there's a value in having a blank slate. And so hypothetically, if you came to see me, it would just be a total blank slate. There's no, well, there's different levels of pre-existing biases and prejudices that we naturally have
Yes.
through our lens of experience. It's interesting. It kind of, if we approach it from what we're getting from therapy and seeing therapy as different seasons. So for this season, that's a perfect match for you. There might be a different season that there's a different match for you.
Okay.
And I would say I've really had a lot of success working with the sort of women that you're saying are your audience based, who are wanting to kind of say from a alpha guy, like I'm not your typical therapist, I'm not just
Yeah.
like a small little, quiet sort of dude. Like I'm a pretty
Right.
big guy. I'm a pretty big personality,
Yeah.
but still having the tools and the emotional intelligence to kind of sit with and be with can be really therapeutic, especially if someone's coming out of either damaged relationship from, a father figure or coming out of a difficult relationship. So I find myself having a lot of conversations about women who've come out of relationship with narcissists or different individuals that have just been really dangerous or damaging and hurtful in their lives, and to have sort of that therapeutic process with me as a guy, actually, not because I'm a particularly better therapist than your therapist per se, but just the projection or the energy in the room can produce just even a deeper level of soothing and healing for the individual.
That makes sense. Have you ever had a client like fall in love with you?
Oh, the classic question.
You get this question a lot. I would think if you're
Yeah.
you're giving them an emotionally safe space, I would think that it had to have happened at some point, or it's not that uncommon.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm even thinking of the affections that I've held towards my therapist that I've had over the years, and to actually say a client fall in love with me, I don't know why I'm thinking like Fatal Attraction or some sort of like.
How about a crush? Like a crush.
Yeah, there certainly have been moments that I'm aware that, or I sense that this client might be having some, different levels of, energetic affection or appreciation for me. There have been moments that I'm like super cautious, where it's like, okay, wait, this could be dangerous, and I need to make sure this person's, scheduled at certain times of day, or maybe I need to, transfer this patient to someone else. Anytime I've felt that, that's actually dangerous. What I typically find more so when it's therapeutically beneficial is that there's a safety and a comfort and an appreciation that might feel an emotional affection in the room, but not in a way that's inappropriate, or not in any way that would be a blurred boundary.
Got it. A connection. Connection's a connection.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to do this kind of work? Because it's not that typical for like a masculine alpha guy to be a therapist.
Yeah. Oh, that's just
and help
question.
people.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have kind of an interesting story. I grew up in a military family. So the way my family got to California was through military services. My dad was in the military, and I was born in the Midwest, and came out to Southern California and stayed out here. So kind of even more so grew up in a very kind of, tough, disciplined, strong, alpha dynamic as far as the dad goes. Great dad, by the way, but, strong dude. And I learned this sort of desire to be of service and to say, how can I kind of help my community civically? My mom was a teacher, dad was in the military. And so I had that desire to serve and to give back, but knew it wasn't that path. I knew I wasn't, I'm way too soft and way too, soft-hearted to kind of go that route. So I had this service orientation. I grew up really devout in my personal faith, and that was a really important part of my upbringing, my childhood. And so kind of that combination of like, do unto others and live sacrificially, but also be of service, help others, led me into high school. And in high school, I was selected by my teachers to be a part of this pilot program back then called PAL. It was called Peer Assisted Leadership. And it was this high school counseling, kind of peer-to-peer counseling program led by our school psychologist, and just absolutely fell in love with it. So in high school, learning counseling skills, active listening, interviewing, motivational interviewing questions, these sort of things really inspired me to say, hey, I can be of service and kind of go down this path of being a professional and helping in the community, and being a therapist. And that kind of paved the way for me to do it. So from high school on, I knew this is what I wanted to do.
That's so cool. And what about the emotional aspect of it? Were you always very like sensitive, and could you pick up on other people's energies like as a young kid?
Yeah. I think, there's a little bit of that came from, again, growing up in my family dynamic where, my dad was a Vietnam vet. So the reality in hindsight analysis most likely had forms of PTSD. And if you ever talk to someone who is like a military wife who, grew up or raising kids with dad gone, my dad was gone a significant amount of time. So there was high levels of emotional challenge in my home. My parents are still together and they're wonderful. And so no part of this is villainizing my folks, but there were some challenges there that kind of shaped a sensitivity to me, kind of honed a spidey sense that I may not have had if there weren't some of those unique challenges. And as a middle kid, so I'm the middle child, I'm wanting attention. I'm, finding ways to uniquely get attention, but also really aware of sort of the emotional temperature in the room. And a part of that was selfish as a kid. How can I glean from it? How can I, take advantage of it? but really kind of narrowed that filter within me to say, okay, I can sense what's happening in the room and know when I need to be scarce or know when I need to, intervene. And some of it kind of played sort of a peacemaker role, wanting to, kind of have a sense of harmony in my home. And so, yeah, I think that was a huge part of kind of honing that skill well before I did any academic training for it.
Now, can I ask you some questions about men? Not to generalize, but, and using yourself as an example. You were married and you have 4 kids with your ex-wife. How long were you married for?
Yeah, I was married for 20 years.
That's a long time. So you got together young then?
Okay, yeah, married right out of college. Yeah.
Okay, and then if I guessed correctly by looking at your Instagram photos, 2 kids are biologically yours and 2 are adopted.
Yeah.
Correct? That's so cool. And the 2 older ones are the ones that are adopted.
Well, kind of fun story. So, in hindsight, fine. When we were first getting together, we thought adoption would be a cool part of building our family. So adoption was on the radar early on. As we kind of moved into thinking we wanted to start trying to have kids, we had some challenges and so had some fertility intervention conversations, but said, let's go ahead and have the adoption conversation as well. And so kind of simultaneously begin to talk about medical options, while at the same time talking about adoption options. And so my oldest son did come home first. And so we adopted my oldest through Department of Child and Family Services. So he came home through foster care, foster adopt system.
Okay. Was he a baby?
He was a baby, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, little 6-month-old little dude.
Oh, cute.
Yeah, super cute little guy. And he came home and we started what was called then, it was called Foster Adopt. I think they've changed the name since, but he was our foster child with the intent to adopt. And went through that process for a couple years. And then while in the process, successfully had a pregnancy with my oldest daughter, India. She was born on October 7th, because then here's the cool part. On that same day in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, my son Kimbe was born, unbeknownst to us. We met him about 6 or 8 months later. Aww. And started the adoption process with Kimbe. And then he came home. And so there are twins. So she was born, this little blonde hair, blue-eyed little girl, born in Laguna Beach, California. He was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, just very dark Caribbean, and they're the Howerton twins. And, so born on the same day, cool. Little twinsies. And then actually while we were waiting for him to come home, it was a long process for him to come home from Haiti. And actually, if you recall, that horrible earthquake they had 12 years ago now, was the catalyst to allow him to come home to us on humanitarian parole and finalize our adoption with him here. So in that window between when we met him and when he came home, we were able to have a successful pregnancy with my youngest daughter, Karis. And so, yeah, that's the 2 boys and 2 girls.
So that's the dynamic of your family.
Yeah.
And how many years ago did you decide to split?
Yeah. So 6 years ago now, we separated and
what was the reason? Or were there
question.
some top few reasons?
Sure. And I guess even my pause, it's difficult to say like in a sentence or a summary, especially after 20 years. The truth is we both had moved away from our religious background, which is a big part of our early kind of connection. And, getting married young was a really important part of that. Kind of realizing, we're not really on the same page in that perspective anymore. How are we really doing? Do we want to keep doing this? We actually had, in terms of the process of divorce, had a very cooperative and cordial divorce. We actually lived together for 2 years in a co-parenting situation. 1 year, a second bedroom in the house. Another year, we have a guest house in the house that she's in now. And I lived in this studio apartment guest house for a full year. And just really wanted to be as smooth as possible for our kids' sake. And there was no sort of abrupt, kind of like, this is it, I'm out of here. It was a gradual sort of realization that we had such significant changes in who we both were individually. And tons of therapy in the process. She's a marriage and family therapist too. So for both of us to be really pro therapy, a lot of hours on the couch from a receiving therapy perspective. And we're kind of able to come to that conclusion of, yeah, we're done here. It's okay to acknowledge that we're not the same people we were at, 21 and, 20 years old. And so it's okay for us to go ahead and tactfully make this move away.
I love that. I always wonder what it's like when 2 therapists are married to each other. Like throughout your marriage, were you constantly checking in with each, like do you just know what to do? Like obviously you know what to do, but did you practice that at home? Like what are
Right.
like do you have bad fights, or do you know how to,
That's great.
resolve things quickly
That's great.
when it comes to your personal life?
Yeah. Well, again, it's the classic statement of like, physician, heal thyself, or the cobbler's kids have no shoes. So there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And sometimes we did it right. Sometimes we did it well. Just like me in my own life now. Sometimes I do it right and sometimes I do it well. There also were times we actually used the tools we had kind of as like little daggers of like you're projecting onto me, or this is obviously your mother issues, or, this is your daddy issues. So there were some times that it would quickly kind of get into some, analytical debate, and we just have these unique, tools that we could use that were darts, maybe different than the couple that doesn't have the psychological training. But at the end of the day, even as, Freud would say, we all have our id. So just because you're a psychotherapist doesn't mean you don't have this id within you that can be motivated by anger and, unpleasantries. So yeah, there were some good moments and bad moments. And make no mistake, I don't want to, create some false pretense. We got divorced for reasons, and some I share publicly and some she shares publicly and some we don't share publicly and we hold privately. She's a therapist still on her own right. She's an author, has a great voice in the world. And there's some things that she shares about our life, which is great. And we've talked about and agreed to, and some things we don't share. And so even that's sort of a way that we respect boundaries that are part of the tools that we learned in therapy school. And yeah, it's still in application.
What have you learned from your first marriage? What are the biggest lessons that you've learned about yourself? Maybe things like, if I could redo it, or like next time I wouldn't do this, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a part of it is, almost a cautionary tale of, I don't want to say getting married too soon, but getting married under the pretense and expectation that this is what we're supposed to do. So again, we both came from, this conservative Christian perspective and felt very dutiful in moving forward in getting married in the first place. There's elements of that are admirable. I'm very much a person who appreciates people of faith and want to be a respecter of all faiths. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there was definitely some misguided, immaturities or nearsighted perspectives of what life was, and kind of classic. Obviously didn't know each other didn't know ourselves very well. Who I am today compared to who I was at 22 years old. I'm a different human in nearly every capacity. So obviously now to say I want to know myself better, I want to be more self-aware, I want to be more in tune with what I really want. Being young in that religious context is like, well, the basic rule is if you want to have sex, you need to get married. And you're 20 odd years old, or, young 20, 19, 20, you want to have sex. And so that's sort of like the golden ticket, in that dynamic. And so to have some broader perspective to realize like, wait, I want to be with a partner. I want to be with someone that I really cherish and respect, and someone who knows me and really loves and cherishes and respects me. And certainly there'll be conflict. To me, conflict is a foregone conclusion. I always do this with my clients. I rub my hands together and say, friction is a result of proximity. Anyone I'm this close to, there's going to be points of friction. I don't want to fear friction because that's actually nice on a cold night. If it's a cold night, I'm happy with the friction. The problem is when it's a hot summer day and it doesn't feel very good, our temptation is to pull away and not have closeness. So somehow in a healthy relationship, we need to manage, I'm close and I celebrate the warmth of our connection. And when I'm tempted to pull away, we find a way to say, how do we come together and not aggravate the source of friction? But the notion of just coming together and being close and having friction points is just a part of life. But with some perspective, being, married for 20 years, being a therapist, being older and much wiser, of course, I can now say knowing myself and being with someone who really has a high value for knowing themselves will alleviate a lot of unnecessary conflict, I think.
So you said that co-parenting was pretty smooth and the divorce process was pretty smooth. Was there pain?
Yeah.
Can we talk about your healing process?
Yeah.
as a man specifically, because I know, well, everyone heals differently. One kind of common thing I see with my guy friends and some exes is they don't even give themselves a chance to heal. They'll start dating right away, jump into something. And if it's one of my friends, I mean, it's easier to see from an outside perspective. I'm like, are you sure like, no, I love her, da, da, da. And then the same scenario kind of plays out. And I was like, okay, so why do men do that?
Yeah.
Did you do that?
Yeah. Duh. Yeah. Well,
I have had girlfriends who have done it as well. I don't want to generalize too much, but I just want to talk about that as well, just so to bring more awareness, maybe if that's a pattern for somebody out there who's listening.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's so many elements. Part of it is what was the pain leading up to the breakup? What was the style of breakup? I would kind of say leading in this conversation, I'm happy to share my process, but as sort of the therapist voice within me is to think that there's a basic template of how we recover or how we heal or how we process pain is kind of a fallacy of an idea. The uniqueness of that person's recovery is as unique as that person, and what led up to that pain. I'd maybe use the illustration of like the passing away of someone. If you have a loved one that, God forbid, had a tragic passing and just, in an accident or something passed away, that would be an egregious level of shock and pain, and the grieving process would be pronounced. And obviously, if you had someone that you loved who was in a long, slow terminal illness and literally battled, a devastating illness for years and then finally passed away, your pain process would be very different, or your grieving process would be very different. So in some cases, there were aspects of my marriage that in hindsight, we knew our marriage was over a long time ago. In fact, I was with a therapist one time and feeling a little spiteful in my session, and had a negative, some negative mojo towards my ex, and kind of like threw a little dart just with my own personal therapist about my ex. And my therapist said, Mark, you guys stopped loving each other a long time ago. And that was so powerful for me to hear, of just oh yeah, that's right. Yes, there's pain points, but we had moved away from each other for a long period of time. So my divorce was more of that terminal illness than just some sort of abrupt, tragic loss, so to speak. So therefore, some of the grieving process I had done was while still in the relationship. So part of the grieving of this isn't what I'd hoped it would be. Can I still exist within this? Can I cohabitate within this? I wished I could have, fill in the blank, more intimate connection, more just appreciation for who I am and for who she is. And so moving away from that over a longer period of time kind of made that grieving process, elongated before the actual separation and divorce and breakup. So, that part of it is for individuals who just kind of get dumped and kind of out of nowhere, that's a tragic loss. And there's going to be this shock dynamic. For somebody who's gradually kind of been in a dying situation for a while, that's a longer, slower process that probably started a long time ago.
Got it. I think whatever you need to do, whatever feels good in the moment, if you want to date, if you want to turn inwards alone. But what do you think are some good things that people can keep in mind as they're going through a healing process, even if they're dating and maybe they're clear, I'm going to date, but these aren't going to be long term? Are there questions they can ask themselves or a way they could approach it to also heal at the same time and not avoid the pain?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, remember, we are pain avoidant creatures, the human animal.
I love avoiding.
Yeah. Why would we don't want to feel pain and discomfort any chance we get. So our natural tendency is to avoid pain. And to some extent, that's okay. I think there's, if you study the stages of grief, and I'm using this as a parallel, I think there's value in it. Denial is one of the stages of grief. And so if I just lost a relationship, like you lost love, when you lost a relationship, there's the death of hope, the death of what I thought was going to be, the death of what I wished for and hoped for has now passed away. And so that grieving process is very much a nice parallel. And denial is a huge part of that. And so first part of that is just no, I'm good. I'm in denial. This isn't bad. And living in that denial for a period of time. When we see individuals, jump right into dating again, and like I said, avoiding the pain, I would even, see that as a part of their process. So again, kind of the classic, therapist within me is like, okay, that's where you're at. It's working for you. There's a saying the thing we say in therapy a lot, that something is not a problem until it's a problem. So you can live in denial for a long time until it smacks you in the face, and so living in that for a period of time from the perspective of stage of grief is okay until you come to grips with when you're ready for it. I actually interviewed a therapist that I was going to see fairly early in my singlehood, and maybe as a part of my denial, I was very much enjoying dating, and I still love that and love it for my clients and people who are in the dating pool. And it's an unfortunate kind of like reverse polarity, or some sort of like interesting chart with if a person's been married for a long time, discontented in marriage, come into the dating pool, mid to late 30s, early 40s, they're like, this is a kid in a candy store. Like, this is a wonderful playground. Versus someone who maybe is focused on their career and said, okay, I want to really focus on, building myself and investing in myself. Now at, mid 30s or early 40s, I'm ready for a relationship. That's an unfortunate sort of, cross sector where this individual is like, I want to date a lot of people. This person's saying, I'm looking for someone. And so it can be an unfortunate mix. But I was on that side of like, this is great. There's a lot of women that I can go out with that I didn't get to go out with before. There's a lot of people I can kiss. There's a lot of things I can do that I wasn't allowed to do before. And so to me, it was more kind of like kid in a candy store, and had a real, a lot of fun enjoying dating as an activity of dating. Obviously, I met, a lot of people who were saying, hey, no, I'm looking for something serious. Cool. That's not what I'm looking for. So it's nice to have sort of that, conversation in the beginning and acknowledge it. But this therapist that I interviewed, I'd read some of her articles, and I reached out to her, and I said, I'm thinking maybe I should move to really addressing my pain, my attachment style, maybe some things from my childhood that I need to readdress, and these sort of things. And I'm in the situation where I'm dating, pretty actively, and I'm having fun with it. And she so wisely just said to me, it seems like it's working for you. It seems like you're in an okay place right now. When you're really ready to say, I want to form an attachment, I want to really look at the elements that I brought to the relationship that added to the demise of the relationship. When you're ready for that, I'm right here. Reach out to me. Give me a call. But until that time, obviously be safe, be responsible, respect people's emotions, respect boundaries, and let me know when you're ready. So for me in dating, and I've shared this with some clients, it was two major questions. I was saying, one, am I ready for a serious relationship? And two, have I found someone I want to be in a relationship with? And so those two questions kind of guided me. And there were times that I met really dynamic, wonderful potential partners, but I just wasn't ready yet. I was still on the playground, or I was still wounded, or I was avoiding my pain, even with a cognitive awareness of it. Sometimes, not always, of course. We love our denial. But even with that awareness of like, no, this is a wonderful potential, possible relationship, but I'm just not there yet. And it's not fair for me to, entangle or distract this person if they're on a different mission. And there were other times that I was like, I think I am open for a relationship, but didn't have somebody in my life that, was a potential partner at that moment.
Timing is a real thing. And so it could be really disappointing sometimes, right? But I want to ask, so how do you tell these women, I guess when you say be respectful and responsible with other people's emotions, just say she wanted a long-term relationship, and you say, it sounds like you would be honest and say, I'm just dating right now. I think sometimes women don't like to believe that, and they'll still be like, oh, maybe he'll change. Yeah. What do you do in that scenario?
Yeah. It's interesting. So as a therapist, it's so easy to have that outside perspective. Part of my job is to maintain objectivity. And so I hear this person, if it's my client situation, they'll change, I'll be able to, and it's a bit of a dichotomy. People are blunt honest, and if they're aware, they're fully honest, or they're, they can be massively deceptive. And so that's sort of the, extreme range of it, for example. So if someone's telling you, I'm not looking for a serious relationship, they're not looking for a serious relationship. And actually, affirm them for being self-aware. Like that's a elevated human being. That's an elevated conversation. And certainly the slant on it is like immature fuckboy, the kid will never grow up, Peter Pan syndrome. And sure, that might be true, but they have enough wherewithal to be honest about it or to call it like it is. So if you hear that, it's, crystal clear. Don't expect something different. They are telling you what they will and then they will not do. The other side of that is they tell you passively. That's telling you actively. Telling you passively is, maybe making some statements that sound wonderful. Hey, I'm all in. This could really be cool. Like there's hope for us. Like, wow, you're different. This is whatever. But then consistently showing you that that's not the case. Violating boundaries, flaking on things, not following through on commitments, not showing up emotionally or relationally when you're needing them to. And then the temptation is to continue to give another chance, where therapeutically I'd be like, they're telling you something. What are they telling you? And certainly maybe the third case would be just the overt, hurtful narcissist that is just genuinely just consuming experiences or people and being, manipulative or hurtful in that. And certainly that's a very dangerous trap to get into. And it's easy to fall prey to that, especially if you are open, soft-hearted, empathetic person, to realize like, wow, I thought this was something different. And this person was a complete monster, or, in hindsight, a complete monster. And that love bomb that I felt was wonderful, but then they disappeared. And, that's a very painful place to be.
Are you actively dating right now, or do you have a partner?
Yeah.
Or is it exclusive?
Great. Yeah. I'm very happy in an exclusive partner relationship. So I've gotten to that place where I said I am ready for a relationship, and I found someone I want to be in a relationship with after these 5 or 6 years, and really excited about entering into this new stage of this relationship and having a blast. Yeah.
How long have you been together?
Yeah. Well, it's still fairly new. We're 7 months in, and it's long distance. So kind of a different thing for me to be in a long distance relationship. But we're able to make it really work. We're with both of us working remotely, a percentage of our work. And when I say my clients, I have clients all over the country. I've got clients in New York, in Vegas, in Austin. And so I'm able to work remotely when I go visit her. She's able to work remotely when she visits me. And in my dating experience and with my friends who are dating and clients, as a parent, as a single parent, dating somebody even who lives 10 miles away, you still might only see each other week on, week off. And so there's a number of friends of mine, I see my partner more often than my buddy sees, his partner who lives, 15 minutes down the road, just because of child schedules and work schedule and these sort of things. So yeah, no, it's super exciting. I'm loving the stage of the game.
Oh, that's great. And then before you met her, were you already open to the possibility of committing to one person, or was it after you met her you asked yourself those questions?
Yeah,
again?
I revisited that therapeutic question I'd asked that therapist many years ago. About a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I approached a therapist and said, I really want to lean into my attachment story, again, all the way back to my childhood with my parents, my first marriage, my children, as my kids are becoming teenagers, I really want to make sure that, I'm available and forming the healthiest possible attachment I can with them. And, what blind spots do I have, if it's from my own avoidance of healing of the last number of years or just my own childhood. I'd love to say that therapists, we all graduate and we get licensed as therapists and we are now personally flawless. That is not true. All that means is we have a higher awareness and deeper vocabulary for our, brokenness and our dysfunctions, potentially. Yeah, started therapy. About 2 years ago. Really focused deeply on my attachment style and who am I and what I really want and how I can work through some of the pain. And even as you say, you shared with me about your therapist, there was a moment just a couple weeks ago I can share where I'm on my video with my therapist, and I just had a conversation about a challenge that I'd had with my ex, and something that's very exciting about my current partner and the love that I'm feeling there. And it was just like amazing process epiphany of like, wow, here this therapist is holding this space for me, and kind of part of my projection from my stuff is this maternal, loving, present, kind of caregiving therapist holding this while I am talking about my ex and then talking about my partner, where it's like this moment right now is almost encompassing the three most important women in my adult life. And that process moment of just having that freedom to be real and emotional with my therapist gave me this deeper attachment ability with my therapist that I can now experience with my partner. And so it's kind of like this process-oriented moment of therapeutic healing and change just by being just really real in the moment. And as I was sharing it with my partner, she was like, well, what did she say? What was the transaction? Like, what did you guys actually say? What was the line? Did you write it down? I said, no, I just felt it. It was just that therapeutic healing moment of being real and vulnerable and raw in the moment, and beautifully restorative. So grateful for it.
Nice. Talking about women in your life, I want to ask about personally your relationship with your mother, and then in general, is it true that with boys or men, the relationship that they have with their mother, does that sometimes translate into how they view their romantic partners?
Yeah. Okay, we're getting real. Let's go.
Well, because I think there's a correlation there. I photographed weddings for 15 years, so I would observe.
Yeah.
And usually the way the groom would look at his mother was very similar to the way he would look at his partner to be. Maybe not every single time, but I did. There's a little correlation there. So I want your take on that.
I love it. Oh, wow. Okay. And I mentioned earlier, I really want to be careful personally and as a therapist to not villainize our families. And certainly in some cases, yes, there are egregious forms of abuse, and there are things that some adult parents are absolutely villains and deserve to be villainized. That's not the case with my family. But nonetheless, I am the byproduct of the family I grew up in, largely speaking, with that emotional template that I grew up with. And so mom, in all her, strengths and weaknesses, was not overly affectionate. And a part of that too, again, God bless her, was trying to be a mom of 3 young kids while, her husband is away in the military and, making life happen. And so I'm able to give her grace in hindsight, partly with therapy, significantly of acknowledging she did the best she could with what she had. And I had some deficiencies. There were some things I needed that I didn't get. And so mom is German descent, not very affectionate. And so growing up with that, there were times, again, middle kid, longing for attention, needed or had a felt need for more affection and more attention and these sort of things. So then my first wife, German descent, not super affectionate,
feels familiar.
Wonderful traits, wonderful human being, but as far as being liberal with affection and and affirmation just wasn't there. And so the cycle of me wanting to actually try to, in my unconscious mind, try to earn the affection that I needed as a child. I'm gonna marry basically a similar template of my mom, and I'll woo her over. I'll finally show her that I'm worthy of getting that love and affection that I need. And of course, it's kind of a fallacy because, she is who she is with all her strengths and weaknesses, and is not going to have a radical change. So unfortunately, that kind of was a part of what led to this, the reality of this is not a person that I should spend the rest of my life with. So I married my mom is the classic, slogan. Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like unconscious or subconscious maybe that we make these choices. What about your new partner? Is she completely different?
Yeah, not completely different insofar as I am A-okay with the fact that I love like high-powered, kick-ass women. My ex was, hardest working person I know, super smart. And my current partner is just an absolute, just dominating, in her profession, vice president of human capital at a tech company, and just literally destroying it. Just love that. So I'm drawn to like that drive, type A, go like Charger, type gal. but very affectionate, just is very much very, deeply mutually respectful, mutually affirming, kind relationship. And so definitely filling that love tank I need, that I went in actually with, eyes wide closed, to my first relationship, hoping that I would get something that just wasn't that person's capacity, able to reach in and dive into this relationship and really receive that love tank filling that I need. And I would say too, that a part of that is out of having a lot of very dating relationships over the last 5 years. So, I mean, how do we know what we want? By knowing what we don't want. And, a number of, wonderful conversations with really wonderful people. I was like, she's great, but she's not for me. Mm-hmm. And, can I maintain some level of friendship or just, distant, communication with, because I genuinely wish her the best, but it's not for me and we're not for each other. So having that experience led to, a very tangible, practical way of, oh yeah, this is what I want. This feels right.
So for high-powered women, high-performing,
yes,
high-performing, career-oriented women, are there certain traits that tend to complement them well when it comes to a romantic relationship that you've seen? Because I myself have never met like two alphas or two type A's where it was sustainable. And I've seen certain dynamics that just seem to work or seem to make sense. Of course, everybody is different. Sure. But are there some like top 3 qualities that tend to work well emotionally with high performing women? Yeah. What does a guy have to have in place?
Sure. Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind. First is there's value in the traditional just yin and yang dynamic. And so if we just, find that complementary fit insofar as, we release ridiculous social stereotypes of, it's important that, the man earns more money than the woman. That's so foolish, like if you kick ass at work, like celebrate that and don't let there be this, emotional value structure of like, oh no, my spouse makes more money, my wife makes more money than me, or I make more money. Celebrate it. I would say celebrate it. So that's that yin and yang dynamic. And it truly might be sort of alpha beta, and leader follower, dynamic that might look like the traditional housewife of the 50s, but just different. And where I live, down in Orange County, it's so fun. Like, I'll pick up my kids for school. And I remember in kindergarten talking with my son's kindergarten teacher, and it was like 90% dads picking up their kids at, 12:30, whatever. My schedule's real flexible, so I'm always able to do that growing up or when the kids grew up. And just kind of laughing about the fact of like, yeah, all these, either whether they're stay-at-home dads or entrepreneurs or self-employed and kind of able to do that flex traditional, mom roles, like that's awesome. And so in those cases, like, yeah, let's blow those traditional gender roles out of the water. So hopefully that can happen if there's that balanced yin and yang piece. The other piece is, as I think about some of my clients, my high performing clients who are looking for a guy, part of it is the approach. And if we approach this as simply a sort of like an accoutrement, like, hey, I need a good handbag, I need a +1, I need a consistent, somebody to show up for my thing. That's like filling a role. That's hiring somebody to come and do your thing for you. That's an interview. That's the subservient sort of, subordinate, role that you're trying to fill. And again, that can work if you find that yin and yang balance. But if you find someone or want someone who is also a strong, confident, dynamic human being, we have to approach it differently. And it's a risk-reward dynamic, because the risk is, well, I'm going to let my guard down and lead with vulnerability and intimacy and hope that this person matches. And, when I say lead, I mean lean into that, like put my toe in the water of vulnerability and intimacy, especially if my role in life and personality type is usually in charge and usually on point and usually, in command. So can I put myself in that role for the benefit of intimacy? And what do I need to do to quickly see that this person I'm with is also open to that? So what's working in my current partnership is we are both at the place where we're saying, here's really who I am. And I'm letting my guard down on purpose. And I'm leaning into this because I'm open to the hope that this will work. And we don't know if it's going to work or not. Of course, this is still new and we're still figuring things out. But there's a clear mutual respect. And we've had enough intimate conversations to realize this is really who I am. This is really what I'm looking for. And again, a part of it is because I've been there. I've done that. And I don't want to do that. And likewise, she's divorced and has her own story of that's who I've been there, done that. I don't want that. So let's do different. And there's a raw openness and vulnerability that frankly is not safe if your perspective is I'm in charge and I'll never, get hugged if I'm like this. If I have my arms crossed, if I am closed off, I won't experience the openness of embrace. So it's a risk reward. And I think there's, just certain things you can quickly identify. Is this person, seemingly self-aware? Is this person open to emotional dialogue that's at a deeper level? Is this person listening to Esther Perel? Is this person open to listening to Goop? Let's just cut to the chase. The pragmatics, or is there a willingness to invest in emotional depth, intellectual or emotional intelligence? And if so, then those are markers that say it feels safe to be a little more exposed, to let your guard down a little bit. And in so doing, realize there's a potential for deeper intimacy, which will accelerate, actual connection and relationship.
I love how you said that, because the way I framed it was more like looking at the other person. But at the same time, I do know that career-oriented women, high-powered women tend to not like to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But relationship is two people coming together. And if you want to create that, like you said, unless you're looking for someone to fill a box or your checklist, right? Sure. Which is usually not fulfilling for people. Mm-hmm. I think some people think it'll be fulfilling, but once it's there, no. But I guess some people want different depths of relationships too. But most of my listeners want a really deep, intimate relationship, is really letting your guard down and being vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, it's part of it too. And I'll tell you my background, grew up with this spirituality or the religion that had spiritual components, moved away from the religion, still have spirituality. And then psychology was existential humanistic psychology. So I have this religious education background and this existential humanistic background. So I'm just as far from the spectrum, the only way I could be more is if I was a Wiccan or something, it'd be the full spectrum of all things kind of psychological and spiritual. But with that, I actually believe from an existential perspective, what's the meaning of this? What's the existential purpose of why we're doing this? And if at the end of the day, it's just to have an attractive plus one, you can go buy a handbag. I don't want a handbag. Or don't be in a relationship and enjoy, you live in an urban area. There's plenty of dating opportunities. There's no problem to not be physically alone if that's all you're looking for. But to hold this perspective, there's depth out there. There's the possibility of meaning. There's the possibility of real love. I'm in. Let's go. I'm a romantic. I believe in love. I love love. And so that's scary. The poets say it's better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. That's fucking risk. Are you willing to take risk? I can't take a risk if I'm always guarded. And so I think part of the connect I have with my corporate clients like this is I'm saying it's worth the risk. And it might be one of the first risks you've ever taken in your life. Because the truth is, we look at your resume or your listeners' resumes, we've seen top of the class, class presidents, scholarship to school, whatever, all the accolades all the way through, promotion. So where's the risk in your life? Well, maybe falling in love is the existential risk of your life. And the willingness to do it, one, it's going to feel scary and out of control possibly, because you're used to control. Two, you might get hurt. You absolutely might get hurt. And that is a part of this. You have to be willing to say, I will take the risk of hurt for the possibility of love and fulfillment and sort of this eternal existential bliss that I don't even know if it exists, but it's worth searching. And especially if I'm already checking all the other boxes. Why not go for it? Let's lean in and try something new.
Oh, I love that. I love that perspective. Can we go back to your divorce? Because I forgot to ask you a question of how did you communicate that with your kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly in if I could go back, there'd be some things we would do a little different. So I don't want a false pretense that we did everything right. By being in the same house and making the decision to be in a second bedroom, that began sort of a awareness of mom's room's dad's room. And so mom and dad are both here. Mom and dad, aren't going anywhere. Your life isn't changing, but mom stays in her room, dad stays in his room. Kind of created, and they were young enough that created basically a norm of that. And so that when, we sat down and said, why are you staying in mom's room, or, why do you have your room? It began a little more of kind of a natural progression of, well, mommy and daddy are, living in separate bedrooms. And then even, are you getting divorced early on? Because my kids are bright and they were, 8, 10, and 12 at the time. So they know, and they have friends whose parents